Greetings, friends. My hair a mess. So today I thought we could talk, or I could talk a little bit about the poetry of Kenneth Rexroth. If you don't know who that is, Rexroth was born in 1905 in South Bend, Indiana, not too far from here, where Notre Dame is. But really a tragic early life. I mean, I think his mother died when he was 11, and his father died when he was 14. So he became an orphan, and which led to by the time he was 18 or 19, he was taken to the road, and he was kind of certainly a bohemian, and he was later kind of lauded as the grandfather of the beats, which he didn't exactly love that description. But pardon me. He nevertheless, he was really connected to the Beats. They really looked up to him, and he was a kind of a helpful figure. He helped a lot of younger poets, especially a lot of young women poets, throughout his life. But his own poetry, I think, is fantastic. I think I first encountered him probably when I was in college, in one of those English literature anthologies. You have it in your intro to literature course. They had his poem, the Signature of Things, which kind of just blew me away. And ever since then, I've been really interested in him. And I'm going to read that poem a little bit later. But everything I've read, in fact, I think that's the first poem of his I read. I think before that, I read his introduction to the alchemical works of Thomas Vaughn, which was the one put out by University Books, the edited version by Arthur Edward Waite. And it was a really, really impressive piece of writing. And plus, he kind of hits all the places where I vibe. His poetry is both erotic and mystical. His interests are also, he's more interested in Eastern philosophy than I am, but he has a wide-ranging vision. Everything comes into the orbit of his imagination, and it's kind of wonderful the way he does this. Now, when I was working on my book, I'm going to show you right here. I got a bunch of stuff piled up. Sophia and XL, and I wrote a chapter on marriage, and basically about marriage and how most of the Christian tradition has gotten it wrong. And the title, actually, for this chapter, you can't really see it probably. There you go. Of what body, through what years, in what light, is actually a line from Rexroth's poem, "The Phoenix and the Tortoise," which is a long poem, which I'll read part of it, but not the whole thing, because it's long. It's very long, but it's really beautiful. Extraordinary poem. And, so he's kind of interested in and this is, I think, you go through this in certainly the Catholic mystical tradition, where the erotic and the mystical, kind of create a Venn diagram and overlap each other. I don't think you see that so much in Orthodox mysticism. That's why Mount Athos doesn't have any women on it. Sorry. I'm so sorry. But his writing, the reason interesting, is another place where this touches on the erotic and the mystical. And I think it's also something I'm really interested in is Thomas Vaughn. Now, if you don't know, Thomas Vaughn was the twin brother of the metaphysical poet Henry Vaughan. And Thomas was both an Anglican priest, and this is the 17th century, and an alchemist. And he engaged in alchemical research, we could say, or chemical research, with his wife, Rebecca. And Rebecca died, which devastated him. And Vaughn's kind of mystical intuition was really wrapped up with his now deceased wife, and who would come to him in dreams and visions. And of course, this is the kind of thing that would really appeal to Kenneth Rexroth. But he was also issues a kind of warning in this essay, The Spiritual Alchemy of Thomas Vaughn, which is in the book With Eye and Ear, which was published in 1970. I was a little kid. And so Rexroth ties what Thomas and Rebecca Vaughn were doing to the ideas of Kundalini and Tantric yoga, right? Which, the whole idea is if you unleash the serpent, you're asking for trouble. And here's what he has to say about that. And I'll read a couple paragraphs. They're not consecutive. Here's what he writes. Not only were the sexual techniques of alchemy assumed to develop internal processes which paralleled operations leading to the production of gold, the philosopher's stone, or the growth of precious metals, cinnabar and sulfur, in the wombs of the uprising mountains. This idea can be found in Proclus in the West and continues to dominate medieval ideas until the translation of Avicenna's treatise against alchemy. The Hieros Gamos literally fecundates the earth. At the same time, it achieves salvation. So the Hieros Gamos is the high marriage, right? The which you see in alchemy, the marriage of the king and queen. And in Kabbalah, the idea that when a man and his wife engage in sexual intercourse on the Sabbath, that prefigures the reunion of God and his Shekinah. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So in Rexroth is really keyed into this, and we'll talk about that. I'll get to that in a second. But here's what he says about Vaughn and Rebecca. Thomas Vaughn and his wife, his soror mystica, or mystical sister, wrapped in a tranced embrace at the pinnacle of Wakefield, were, it is true, blundering into a region of revelation which they little understood, and which, it would seem, eventually destroyed both of them. They were doing what Chinese adepts had done at least 400 years before Christ, and what others may have done in the Indus Valley 3,000 years before. But they were also concomitantly performing a chemical experiment, and they believed that neither could be successful without the other. And he says a little bit later, it may be objected that what I have explained in literal detail exactly what Thomas Vaughn and his wife were up to. The reason should be obvious. It killed them. Tantric and yogic works are full of warnings for the dangers of unguided autonomic nervous system experiments. The neophyte is told again and again that he can only learn only by submitting himself to the personal guidance of a teacher, a guru. If not, he is warned that he will certainly come to a bad end. Furthermore, all texts all over the world of this type of mysticism point out that the precondition and essential foundation for all such practices is right living, the fulfillment of the commonplace injunctions of Buddhist, Christian, and Chinese morality. Without this foundation, the would-be adept is, as the experience of millenniums has shown, inevitably doomed, right? And this is interesting too, because I think Rexroth, who actually in the forward to the Phoenix and the Turtle, or the Tortoise, admits that he's kind of an acolyte of D.H. Lawrence. And you can see, because for D.H. Lawrence also the erotic leads to the mystical, and it's a way, it's a very different way to think about sexuality in a Christian context. I'm not certainly D.H. Lawrence was not your dad's Christian, but I think he thought of himself as a Christian. And likewise, Rexroth. Now, I've read different accounts of this. One is that he converted to Catholicism the year before he died, which is 1982. But the other thing I read I think it was from him, that he regularly attended Mass. I mean, he was a regular churchgoer. And you can see with the Catholic tradition how it's very, not a Novus Ordo church so much, but the Catholic liturgy, especially, is very sensual. Catholic culture is very sensual. The senses are involved, right? You have those beautiful works of art and statues and architecture and the smells and the bells. It's very appeals to the senses, where you don't get that in Protestant forms of worship, which are very austere, right? Um, so, so I mean, I'm going to read a little bit from the Phoenix and the Tortoise. Where'd it go? Here it is. I picked it upside down. So the Phoenix and the Tortoise, which I think is one of my favorite poems ever. I'll read you a couple sections. It's very long, as I mentioned. And he really is, another reason I love him so much is he's big time into Yaka Burma, which is guilty as charged. Me too. Where did it go? Here we go. This is from the first section. Yeah, from toward the end of the first section. It is past midnight, and the faint myriad crying of the seabirds enters my sleep. The wind rises. I hear the unbelievably distant voices of the multitudes, of men mewing in the thoroughfares of dreams. The waves crowd on the beach. A log falls on the fire. The wind funnels the sparks out in the moonlight, like a glowing tree dragged through the dark. I see in sudden vision. I see in sudden total vision. The substance of entranced Burma's awe, the illimitable hourglass of the universe eternally turning, and the gold sands falling from God, and the silver sands rising from God, the double splendors of joy that fuse and divide again in the narrow passage of the cross. I mean, whoo! That's pretty good. Boy, this guy's so good. And that's really representative of his poetry. And actually, this was published by New Directions, if you know that poetry publisher, James McLaughlin. And McLaughlin said, when Rexroth got to this book, it's like, he hit the stride. I mean, he just opened up something extraordinary in the world of poetry, and I think it's true. But I'm going to read toward the end, which is one of my very favorite moments. And in fact, I quoted in Sophia in Exile as well. He says, let me see where I'm going to start. I'll start here. This is the prime reality, bird and man, the individual discriminate, the self-valued actual, the operation of infinite, ordered potential. Birds, sand grains, and souls bleed into being. The past reclaims its own. I could have, it might have been different. Sunsets on Saturn, desert roses, corruptions of the will. Quality, the terminable future, fall into quantity, into the irreparable past, history's cruel irresponsibility. This is the minimum negative condition, the condition humaine. The tragic loss of value into barren novelty. The condition of salvation. Out of this alone, the person emerges as complete, responsible act. This lost and that conserved. The appalling decision of the verb to be. Men drop dead in the ancient rubbish of the Acropolis. Scholars fall into self-dug graves. Jews are smashed like heroic vermin in the Polish winter. This is my fault. The horrible term of weakness, evasion, indulgence. The total of my petty fault, no other man's. There's so much going on in that section. I mean, the guilt of the world that descends upon him. And out of this shall I reclaim beauty, peace of soul, the perfect gift of self-sacrifice, myself as act, as a mortal person. I walk back along the sandpit. The horizon cuts the moon in half. And far out at sea, a path of light, violent and brilliant, reflected from the high stratus clouds, and then again on the moving sea. The invisible sunrise spreads its light before the moon. And here's the conclusion of the poem. My wife has been swimming in the breakers. She comes up the beach to meet me. nude, sparkling with water, singing high and clear against the surf. The sun crosses the hills and fills her hair as it lights the moon and glorifies the sea, and deep in the empty mountain melts the snow of winter and the glaciers of 10,000 years. Right, and then, so there he sees a revelation of the divine feminine in his wife. And unfortunately, his marriage didn't last that long. He was married 4 times, I believe. And you can imagine a guy with a traumatic background, and apparently he had bouts of paranoia, and struggled with poverty for much of his life. And even though he got 2 Guggenheim fellowships, but how's that? And finally, let me read from The Signature of All Things, which is not that long ago. I'll read the whole thing. This is the one that, as I mentioned, got it for me. The Signature of All Things. My head and shoulders in my book in the cool shade, and my body stretched bathing in the sun, I lie reading beside the waterfall. Burma's signature of all things. Through the deep July day, the leaves of the laurel, all the colors of gold, spin down through the moving, deep laurel shade all day. They float on the mirrored sky and forest for a while, and then, still slowly spinning, sink through the crystal deep of the pool to its leaf gold floor. The saint saw the world as streaming in the electrolysis of love. I put him by and gazed through shade, folded into shade of slender laurel leaves, or trunks and leaves filled with sun. The wren broods in her moss-domed nest. A newt struggles with a white moth, drowning in the pool. The hawks scream, playing together on the ceiling of heaven. The long hours go by. I think of those who have loved me, of all the mountains I have climbed, of all the seas I have swum in. The evil of the world sinks. My own sin trouble fall away like Christian's bundle, and I watch my 40 summers fall like falling leaves and falling water held eternally in summer air. Deer are stamping in the glades. Under the full July moon there was a smell of dry grass in the air, and more faintly the scent of a far-off skunk. As I stand at the wood's edge, watching the darkness, listening to the stillness, a small owl comes to the branch above me, on wings more still than my breath. When I turn my light to him, his eyes glow like drops of iron, and he perks his head at me, like a curious kitten. The meadow is bright as snow. My dog prowls the grass, a dark blur in the blur of brightness. I walk to the oak grove where the Indian village was once. There, in blotched and cobwebbed light and dark dim in the blue haze, are 20 Holstein heifers, black and white, all lying down, quietly together, under the huge trees rooted in the graves. When I dragged the rotten log from the bottom of the pool, it seemed heavy as stone. I let it lie in the sun for a month, then chopped it into sections and split them for kindling and spread them out to dry some more. Late that night, after reading for hours, while moths rattled at the lamp, the saints and the philosophers on the destiny of man, I went out on my cabin porch and looked up through the black forest at the swaying islands of stars. Suddenly I saw my feet. Suddenly I saw at my feet, spread on the floor of night, ingots of quivering phosphorescence, and all about it were scattered chips of pale, cold light that was alive. I mean, it's a lot of allusions to Burma, like the light that's alive, and that's a big image, scattered sparks, like a very Gnostic image that you see from Burma, but that also inspired Rexroth. And so you can see he's, it's a poetry that sees divinity in this world, in the things of this world, maybe not in everything of this world, but certainly in beauty, in revelations of beauty, and even revelations of simplicity. Anyway, So I thought that's what I wanted to share with you today. And, I'm going to start doing these on a regular basis now because I can. So if you like what you saw, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. And please leave comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And until then, I salute you.